today we have some very serious issues to address, and we apologize for the delay in the start. And so I'm just going to tell you who we have at the head table with us this morning. We have the Vice President and Member of Parliament for North Leeward, Mr. Roland Patel Matthews, and we also have the Leader of the Opposition, Member of Parliament for Northern Grenadines, Dr. Godwin Friday. We will be addressing the issue of accountability and transparency on several boards in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and so I'm going to turn over to Dr. Friday to go straight into the presentation today.
Well, thank you, Laverne, and thank you, members of the media, for being here today. As Laverne indicated, this is a very serious subject matter that we are going to be dealing with today, and we are hoping that this will begin a conversation with the people of this country about what is required for accountability and how we have been not meeting that standard over the past. Several weeks ago, as members of Parliament, we completed an exercise that was a vital and fundamental pillar in the structure of governance in our country. I speak of the budget presentation and debate, in which the annual estimates of revenue and expenditure for the financial year 2017 were presented by government and authorized by Parliament. We are all aware of the need for the budget presentation. We are quite familiar with its format and its style. And indeed, it has become a regular and publicly anticipated part of the business of running our country. What many of us are not familiar with are the constitutional and legal basis for the budget exercise and the various requirements that are set out in the law. In this regard, there are several important facts we should know. The first thing is that the practical and legal responsibility for implementing the budget exercise rests with the Minister of Finance, and this responsibility is set out in Section 70 of the Constitution and in the Finance Administration Act 2004, which says at Section 5 that, and I quote, "The Minister of Finance is responsible for the preparation of the estimates, the government's fiscal management and control, including the management and control of revenue and expenditure, and of the consolidated fund." It also goes on to say that the Minister of Finance is responsible for ensuring that a full account of the finances of the government is laid before the House of Assembly in the public accounts. That's a direct quote from the Act. This last item, that is, ensuring that a full account of the government finances is laid before the House, is not referring to the budget presentation itself. Rather, it relates to accountability after the fact. Specifically, it refers to the provision to Parliament, and by extension to the nation, of audited accounts of national revenue and expenditure, including capital expenditure that occurred over the previous year. This matter of accountability is fundamental and critical as it goes from the top to the bottom of the business of government. It crosses all sectors and it connects to everything else that happens in the business of running the country. So, The two things we must understand about accountability are, one, it includes the need to give full account of all funds received and spent on behalf of the public. And two, accountability is not optional. As specified in the law quoted above, the work of accountability is legally and constitutionally required. It must be performed annually, and it is the responsibility of the Minister of Finance to ensure that it is performed annually. This is a simple matter of fact. It is spelled out in the law. But let's dig a little deeper into the legal requirements. I think you might find this interesting. To reiterate, the law requires that a full, and I'm quoting again, a full account of the finances of the government be laid before the House of Assembly in the public accounts. That is a three-step process. The first step of which is the preparation of the public accounts by the Accountant General. Section 7 of the Finance Administration Act 2004 states that the Accountant General is responsible for, and I'm quoting now, maintaining the central accounts of the government so as to show the current state of the consolidated fund and the financial condition of the government. End of quote. The importance of the consolidated fund is that it is the depository of all public money specified in the Constitution and in the law. Specifically, the Finance Administration Act, Section 49, says that, subject to subsection 3, the Accountant General shall, within 4 months after the end of every financial year, prepare, certify, and submit to the Director of Audit the public accounts of St. Vincent and the Grenadines for that financial year, accounting for all public money and showing fully the financial position of St. Vincent and the Grenadines at the end of the financial year. So that's the first step. The second step is that the Director of Audit must audit the accounts prepared by the Accountant General. The Audit Act of 2005 says at Section 12, and I quote, the Director of Audit shall, in each financial year, not later than 3 months after receipt of the certified public accounts for that year from the Accountant General, submit his report on the public accounts to the Minister. The third step is that the Minister of Finance must lay the Director of Audit's report in the House of Assembly. Quoting again from the Audit Act, it says, the Minister shall, not later than 7 days after the House of Assembly first meets after he has received the report, lay it before the House. And the Act goes on to say, if the Minister fails, and I'm quoting again, if the Minister fails to lay the report before the House of Assembly, the Director of Audit shall transmit the report to the Speaker, who shall, as soon as practicable, present it to the House of Assembly. So it must be presented to the House of Assembly. Now, I want to return to the fundamental fact I pointed out above, which is that accountability is not optional. It is a legal and constitutional requirement, and it is the responsibility of the Minister of Finance to ensure that the legal and constitutional requirements are met, and there are legally specified mandatory timeframes for doing so. It is a matter of unfortunate public record that this particular work item, the business of accountability, has consistently been neglected and ignored by this current Minister of Finance, who happens to be the Prime Minister. Now, interestingly, the Audit Act also speaks very clearly relation to statutory bodies, that is, companies and agencies owned by the government. At Section 13 of the Act, it states, and I quote, "The Director of Audit shall, no later than 6 months after the end of each financial year, make such examinations and inquiries to enable him to audit the accounts of each statutory body for the previous year and report as required by this Act." This brings us to the International Airport Development Corporation, the IADC, which is a statutory body that was set up by the ULP government with the functions of financing and building the Argyle International Airport. The IADC was established in 2004. Today, 13 years later, not a single audited financial statement of the IADC has been brought to Parliament by the Minister of Finance. In other words, the IADC has operated for 13 years, and in complete contravention of the laws of the country, the Minister of Finance has not brought a single audited financial statement of the IADC to Parliament, and therefore to the people of this country. Similarly, National Properties Limited, a statutory corporation established by this government in 2001 to handle real estate transactions, and which has been deeply connected to the operations of the IADC since 2005, has not had a single audited financial statement laid in the House for the entire time of its operation. The local companies that the government established to operate the Petrocarib scheme, which have had hundreds of millions of dollars passing through them over the past 10 plus years, have never had audited financial statements laid in the House. The list goes on. Bragsa, the National Lotteries, the Tourism Authority, no audited financial statements have been laid in the House. All have been delinquent. Companies dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars, your dollars, the people's money, and no accountability to show how your money was used. I want the people of this country to understand that these are bodies that are owned by the taxpayers of this country, owned by you and me. And neither you nor I have the slightest idea how these companies are spending the monies that pass through them. This state of affairs is unlawful. The laws of the country pertaining to financial transparency and accountability are being ignored, they are being neglected, they are being willfully broken by this ULP regime. Now let us go back to the airport for a bit, because it is the most recent and by far the largest single example of what we are talking about here. The airport has been built, it is open, and the Prime Minister tells us that it's now the responsibility of all citizens of this country to get together and make it work. I have said in the past and maintain that given the large scale of the project and its implications for the country, we must do what we can to make it work. But what about the responsibility of the Minister of Finance? What about the responsibility of the Director of Audit? What about the responsibility of the Accountant General? All of the above mentioned officials have legally specified responsibilities relating to accountability that cannot be shoved aside for any reason. But the Minister of Finance, who the law says has the final responsibility of ensuring that a full account of the finances of the government is laid before the House of Assembly in the public accounts, has not done his job. He has not done what the law requires him to do. Yet he now wants to hand over to us and say, here, Olia, make it work. He's telling us that we must make it work. But what is the it exactly? What actually was the cost to build Argyle? Is it $700 million, as has been reported recently in some news media? But also, a few weeks ago, you may recall that Senator Julian Francis on a radio program said that it cost $1.3 billion, of which Vincentian paid about $800 million, and because it got $500 million of that in-kind contributions. And then we are told by Dr. Gonzalez, the Minister of Finance, during this year's budget debate that the country owes $400 million that was borrowed specifically to build the airport. But he brought no audited financial statements from the Director of Audit to support anything that he said. So, we are supposed to take his word for it? What is the true cost? All sorts of numbers are being bandied about. Every time you turn around, you hear a different figure. Are we supposed to just believe the PM, the Prime Minister, because he said this in the House of Assembly? Well, that is not how it works. We cannot simply take his word for it. In fact, the law says that we must not take his word for it. And the more important question is this: how do we know that all the hundreds of millions of dollars actually went to the airport? How do we know that some of these monies did not go through the airport and end up somewhere else? The fact is we cannot know because there has been no audited financial statements. You see why the laws of the country says that there must be full annual audited accounts. Recall also that the International Monetary Fund last year revealed that the government had left $112 million of debt to Petrocarib off the books. $112 million of this country's debt not entered into the government's accounts. Was that a matter of incompetence on the part of the Minister of Finance? Or was it by design, incompetence by design? If the Prime Minister had done his job, that is the Minister of Finance, and ensured that the laws were being followed, all of this would have been presented, audited, and reported, so that there would be no doubt about any of it. But now we are left to ask, is he even capable of doing the job of the Minister of Finance? Or is he incapable? Why is the minister not doing his job? Why is it that this government is breaking the law concerning accountability? Why is there no accountability for the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been spent on Argyle and on all sorts of other things that we don't know about? I want to ask Vincentians, what would you do if you had $1 million right now? Imagine how that would change your life. $1 million, it's a huge sum of money. And what we have here is a situation where this government, headed by Ralph Gonzalez, is handling hundreds of millions of dollars. And we can't get a straight answer from them about where the monies went. This state of affairs is simply unacceptable and inexcusable. The Minister of Finance, who is the Prime Minister, has systematically and consistently either neglected, ignored, or broken the laws of this country concerning accountability. Under this ULP administration, this country has witnessed a steady and systematic erosion of the principles and practices of good governance. The norms, the rules and regulations, the actual laws relating to accountability and transparency have been flouted, ignored, and broken. In a modern democratic society, public funds cannot be spent in the dark. The law does not allow it. And we, hand in hand with the Vincentian people, will not allow the government to break the law with impunity. In fact, such behavior smacks of misbehavior in public office. And speaking of misbehavior, you will recall a couple of years ago when we were asking in the Parliament for the government to provide the Vincentian people with audited financial statements for the IADC, the International Airport Development Company, which is required by the law. The Minister of Finance then said, of this country, said that if he should show a man his title deed, imagine that, his title deed. That response was nothing but a dictatorial and disgraceful expression of contempt for the law, contempt for good governance, and contempt for the intentions. This contemptuous, unlawful behavior cannot and must not continue. The Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, and his cohorts in government have already shown their absolute contempt for the whole business of transparency and accountability. So we in the New Democratic Party now call on the Director of Audit, who is a constitutionally independent office and a servant of the public interest, to break the silence on this matter of vital and fundamental national importance. We await her urgent response. But in the meantime, we shall be taking necessary actions to see that this atrocity does not continue. Despite all the overheated rhetoric we hear from Dr. Gonsalves about good governance and serious business, he is in breach of the law concerning accountability. Under successive European administrations, governance in St. Vincent and the Grenadines has actually fallen by the wayside and has been replaced by smoke screens, a hug-up, and a set of daily old talk on the radio programs. You see, accountability is not about going on the radio every day and talking. Accountability is what the Finance Administration Act says. It is what the Audit Act 2005 says. And that is the standard that we in the New Democratic Party will hold ourselves to. We will demonstrate what good governance is. In fact, you can consider this the first lesson in how good governance is supposed to work. And take our word for it, we will make governance work. We will make the airport work. We will make this country, SVG, work. Thank you.
Thank you for your thank you for that statement, Dr. Friday. Indeed, there is a lot of unanswered questions that needs to be addressed in St. Vincent and the Grenadines as it relates to the finances and the public purse of our taxpayers. And at this time, we will open the floor for questions from members of the press. All right, so first we will take the question from from the news.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all. I'm Ashford Peters, representing the News newspaper. Dr. Friday just a short while mentioned that you will be taking, or the NDP will be taking actions to ensure that what you have outlined does not continue. Now, what are the options open, and what kind of actions are you speaking about? Can you give it?
Well, Ashford, we have been over the years talking about accountability and transparency in government. I mean, not just here, but we do it in Parliament. And what we have done, what we're doing today, is we are taking the matter up with the public. We have a public duty to educate people about what is required and where it's not being met. We have also, as I said to you, we have called on the Director of Audit to also to play that important role to ensure that the accountability standards that are set out in the law are met and that they're treated the way they are supposed to be, which is very serious public business. And this press conference here today is a continuation of that process, but it's also a heightened political activity that we in the Democratic Party will be doing with respect to this matter.
Dr. Friday, what is the state of the Public Accounts Committee? Because as you, as leader of the opposition, now becomes the head of the Public Accounts Committee, can you tell us what is the state of the Public Accounts Committee? Have you had any meetings since? And
Well,
does the situation with the Public Accounts Committee where the reports
yeah.
are way behind, does this lend itself to the situation that you have outlined?
Well, Ashford,
The delinquency.
part of, you've heard in the past, you've heard talk about the functions of the Public Accounts Committee. And attempts have been made in the past to say, oh, well, you're complaining about accountability, but the Public Accounts Committee hasn't met and so on and so forth. The fact of the matter is, the way the process works is as I've outlined. The first thing that has to happen is that the Director of Audit has to prepare the audited statements, present them to the Minister, they're laid in the House, and then the Public Accounts Committee can do its work. If this isn't done, then the Public Accounts Committee has nothing to do. So the first responsibility comes in the process of preparing the public accounts, which is done by the Accountant General, auditing those accounts, which is done by the Director of Audit, and then they're presented to the Minister of Finance, who then presents them to the House. Then the Public Accounts Committee goes to work. And what we have had over the many years is that the Public Accounts Committee has basically not been able to do its job because a lot of the statements that have been, the audited statements, are way behind. I think the last ones that were issued were for at least 2010, 2011. We're now in 2017. So the Public Accounts Committee, of which I am the chairperson, as the leader of the opposition, we can only do the job that is required of us when the accounts are presented in the Parliament. That's where our mandate comes from. So the idea of trying to pass the buck and to blame the Public Accounts Committee is one of simply not taking the responsibility as a Minister of Finance and as the other offices that I've mentioned in my statement.
Dr. Friday, how long do you anticipate that Vincential will have to wait before some real actions taken on this situation where there's this gross delinquency, if we may refer to it as this?
Well, we are going to keep the pressure up. And a lot of it will have to do with how the officials, who, as I said, my statement, constitutionally independent, they can't be influenced by government or by me as the leader of the opposition. But we have a responsibility to point out when the requirements of the law are not being met and to engage the people who are responsible for doing so to actively to make sure that they fulfill their mandate. And this is what we will continue to press. And we hope that the response will be, as we said, that it will be urgent, because the matter is way behind time, and the public needs an understanding of what happens to the funds, especially when you have large, huge projects with hundreds of millions of dollars flowing through it, and we can't have an accounting as to how the funds were spent. That is simply not acceptable. So we are hoping that this matter will be treated with urgency, but we certainly are going to treat it that way. As to the time frame, let's wait to hear what the Director of Audit says.
I will go back again to the news he still has some questions that he would like to pose.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. King. Dr. Friday, the situation in your own constituency with regards to the threatened disconnection of electricity on Beckway because of the lack of payment of outstanding